Hello, welcome to our learning lunch today. We are Tech Leaders Academy. We do trainings, coaching, and events for tech professionals, especially who want to take the next step of their tech careers. And yeah, before we start with the learning lunch topic today, which is the Developer Insights Germany, we want to make a short announcement because in October we are going to launch our new training. It's called the Tech Lead Masterclass. This is a 6-week program, especially designed for engineers who want to become tech leads and who want to lead the technical direction of their companies without being an actual manager. So, without being a people manager, meaning these people tend to be called staff engineers or principal engineers or also tech leads. And for these people, we designed something very specific. And if you have interest in joining our first cohort in October, check out our website. You see it already down below. And yeah, that's it already with the advertising part. And now we are coming to our topic today. So, Sebastian, hi, nice that you're here as well. So, what we are
Yeah.
going to talk about?
Thank you for the intro, Sarah. So today we're going to talk about numbers. And I mean, we're all techies. We love to talk about numbers. We love to talk about statistics. And we're talking about a very specific topic. We're talking about employment data of software engineers, software developers in Germany. And for that, we have a phenomenal guest with us, Franziska Hauck. She is writing a lot about this. She crunched the numbers and looked at a lot of sources where to get this data and also visualized it. And I'm really happy to welcome her on stage. Hello, Franziska.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's so great to have you. And it would be great if you could just introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Franziska Hauck. I am based in Berlin, actually. I love Berlin. And I've been working in the digital sphere and in tech for a little over a decade now. And for the last years in my main job, I have primarily been a people manager, people lead for technical teams, engineering teams, product teams. There are different ways to call those. I also used to be a regional lead for developer relations at Google. So I'm very well networked in the tech communities. And that was also the reason why I stumbled across the numbers. I came across that in a project and then actually did some freelance work on that. And ever since then, I got hooked and I was like, these are really, really fabulous numbers. We should definitely talk about those more. And we don't have, let's say, a huge bandwidth of data that we can work with, but the data we have really tells interesting stories. And also to check that against, let's say, the anecdotal impressions that we have from the communities, check our own biases, really, really good. So yeah, that is something that I've been writing about intensely for the last years. To round up my introduction, my pronouns are she, her, hers. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the talk today.
Great.
Great. I actually prepared an icebreaker question for you, and I think it fits perfectly to today's topic because it's also about jobs. And my question is, what was your dream job when you was a child? When you were a child?
So, funny story, I am a history nerd, or at least used to be for large parts of my life. So, I kind of always saw myself as a historian or archaeologist, and I prepared to go towards that because I have a master in World Heritage Resource Management. And also, funnily enough, it helped me a lot in my career in the tech sphere. So, thank you for that, dear Bournemouth University. But yeah, that was how I envisioned my career to be, that I would work somehow in the heritage field and I would explain historical facts, details, unearthed treasures, and then relate that to people, which is kind of what I'm doing right now, just with a different kind of focus.
All right.
Yeah, great.
Oh, by the way, there is this whole idea of data archaeologist, and this will be a role in the future. So maybe we'll see that popping up as well.
Yeah.
Oh, this is an interesting topic for the next session, right?
So, just for the audience to mention and highlight this in particular, you can interact with us. Belinda, hi, Belinda, you're watching us right now. She's already joining the session. She's very excited to see the results. We as well. So, if you have any comments in between, if you want to maybe also add your ideas, your experiences, but also your questions. You can always use the chat, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch. We are streaming to all 3 platforms, and then you can do so.
Yeah. So I would say before we start diving into the numbers, it would be great to talk about where's your data from? So what are your sources basically?
Very, very good question, because I think spend about 3 or 4 weeks cumulatively just to find the right sources, right? We actually have a couple of source areas, and I would like to detail those before we go to the sources that I primarily work with. The most of the time in the developer field and the tech experts field, you will see surveys. So we have good examples like the Stack Overflow survey that comes out, I think, every year. And this is great. And over the last years, we have seen more surveys popping up. The problem or the hurdle that I see with that is the survey always depends on the target group. It always depends on the community that the provider of the survey works with primarily. One of the things that popped immediately into my sight when I looked at the Stack Overflow numbers was that I think over 90% of participants are men. And for Germany, that means a kind of accurate representation, but not worldwide, because in the US, we tend to have more like 70% men as a share. So I was like, okay, this seems to depend on the community you work with, and that impacts what kind of data, what kind of information you're able to extract. The same we see for salary surveys as well. A lot of the salary surveys just ask the community or take the numbers from that particular audience of the provider. So I was like, okay, we need to find sources that give us a bit more of an independent and broader view. And I came across 2 really, really great sources that I quote every time. And again, the data sets are limited, but they are in and of themselves really great. And one of the data sets comes from the Federal Agency for Employment in Germany. And that data gives us information about people of all kinds of job categories. There are, I think, about 9 larger job families and then divided into subgroups. So you could even look up kindergarten teachers, right? That is a profession that you can also look up salary levels and so forth. And we have that we have 4 subcategories in the IT category. And one of those subcategories is software developers and programmers. That's how it's actually called in German. So we do have some sister subgroups where, yeah, it's good to also have the data inside, and I did some analysis on that as well, but this is the most narrow category. And it gives us information on all salary developers. So all of the people that have employment with an employer, because the employer feeds that information back to the Federal Agency of Employment and says this person is employed with us under this particular category. So we don't have data on the freelance developers or those that happen to have their own companies, right? That being said, I dug into the numbers a little bit. I found a little bit of data from freelance associations, and every indication that I have is that if you add about 10 to 15% to the number of salary developers, we kind of end up with the overall number. That's at least my estimation. So that's one source. And the other source that I also found, and actually fairly recently, is the Statist. And this is the statistics agency from the German government. And there you have to dig really, really deep, because the Statist primarily works with graduate information. So it doesn't really care about what you work as at the moment. It just looks at, oh, you graduated from an informatics bachelor degree, something like that. But this is also great because there you find more information about graduates and study numbers. That's also great. And salary levels we find as well. And combining those 2 sources also gives us a more vivid picture. So these are the 2 primary sources that I work with. There are some other statistics with the local and regional councils that you can look up, but they are very, very limited. So I don't tend to look into those, because it would be very, very challenging to get all of the data from all of Germany's regions and locations together. But yeah, those are my 2 primary sources.
So that also means we are looking in particular on software developers, and that also explains why numbers might be a little lower compared to the whole IT sector, because you mentioned you have like 4 categories. One is software developers, because if you look up the IT stuff in Germany, I think the official statistics say something around 1.2 million or something like that. So you have like a subset of that.
Yes. But you have to add to that, again, we only look at the salaried folks in IT. So adding about 10 to 15% of freelancers is probably the thing to do. Whether that applies to things like tech sales as well in this number, we would have to check. And also what I found, interestingly enough, the developer subcategory is the largest. So it has the highest share. It's a little over a third every year. So I looked up all of the last years from 2017 all the way up to 2022. And it continues to be the largest. And all the subcategories grow at around the same pace, but the developer category also grows at a higher pace than the other categories, which is also interesting information.
Okay.
So does it also include the data people? Because I'm always representing, of course, the data folks, like data engineers and data scientists. Are they also part of these data sets?
Mm-hmm. Very, very good question, Sarah, because that is one that I haven't yet been able to answer myself. So I had this whole question, particularly also from the community. Where are the product folks? Where are the UX designers? Ça dépend. We don't really know. Maybe that's something that the Federal Agency for Employment could identify to us. And in preparation to our call, I thought maybe I can do a press request to the Federal Agency for Employment to really identify whether that is the case. We do see in the subcategory some description of typical job descriptions you would find in that category, and they are fairly broad. So I would assume, Sarah, that a DevOps engineer could either be placed into the systems organization category or the developer category, and a data scientist could be placed in the general informatics category, but also could be placed in the software developer category. So there we have the data is a bit fluffy, I would say. Still, it's a nice approximation, and checking the numbers, it goes in accordance with all the other sources that I found. So I would say, sorry, dear data scientists, sorry, dear experts, sorry, dear product experts. At this point in time, the one thing that we can pinpoint quite well are developers.
Yeah, and I think it also includes the cybersecurity, or at least we don't know exactly if it's included here, because like the categories are kind of broad, and maybe it's is a bit depending on the people that have to evaluate if somebody or some people, some jobs are included in or not.
And that being said, the whole HR domain, and I am a cross between HR and engineering essentially, but HR in Germany is very traditional, and the handling of such modern jobs is often not always on the radar of people. And in the companies, at least it is, you see a lot of specialist roles popping up, HR focused with product and tech. But I would doubt that from the Federal Agency for Employment side, right? We have seen various times that our sphere is so changing so vastly and so rapidly that it's really hard for the authorities to catch up with the categorization. So I anticipate that it will even get worse with the categorization, but don't pin me down on that. It's just something that I feel like we will see. So my assumption is cybersecurity would probably be under the developer heading. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we could now dive in. Sarah, would you like to start with the first question?
Yes, I would like to start with the first question, which is of regard, or which goes into the question, where do all the developers live? And therefore, I have the first question also for the audience. Please give us a sign from where are you watching us? Do you are from Germany or from abroad? I think that's an easy question that you can all answer. Just give us also some kind of stats, who is watching us right now. And the question also goes to Franziska. Where do all the developers in Germany especially live?
Yeah, and that is something that in my research, I had these like light bulb moments, and I love sharing those with all of you. My assumption was that we would primarily see developers in the large hubs. And yes, we do see that. So about 66% of developers in hubs with where you have 2,000, 3,000 plus developers locally, right? What I meant with locally, I had to make somehow a categorization of which of the councils I would put together for one hub. I can detail that in a second as well. So we see that the vast majority of developers actually lives in Berlin and Munich. Those are the two major hubs, right? Roundabout with Berlin, Potsdam, Augsburg included, going towards 30K developers locally. We have to understand Munich has a large catchment area, Berlin as well, like the whole of Brandenburg sometimes is kind of included, at least mentally, in Berlin. Not to offend anyone who sits in Brandenburg, I respect the Brandenburgers. And then we have other hubs that people don't really know about that much. We have, I think, let me just check in so that I don't give you any wrong numbers. But yeah, we have over 20,000 developers in Stuttgart and surroundings. Stuttgart, right? And then experts will be like, Stuttgart, what is that? Never heard of that. We have, and funnily enough, it's higher than, for example, Hamburg, where we have 15,000 with Hamburg and some of the surrounding councils. We do have strong focal points in Frankfurt, Main, where we have over almost 18,000. We have the usual suspects like Karlsruhe, Mannheim, Heidelberg, which is kind of one of the Silicon Valleys we have in Germany. We have surprising numbers like Ruhrgebiet, where in Ruhrgebiet alone, we have almost 12,000 developers. So those are some, you would be like, okay, Ruhrgebiet, but it still makes sense. But the interesting fact is, and that is something that I find is the magic of Germany, particularly when we compare it to other countries. In the UK, for example, almost all of the developers are in London. And then you have some offshoots in Edinburgh and Glasgow and Birmingham and so forth, right? This is different in Germany. So we could see it as 66% of all developers live or are assigned to larger hubs. But we also have over 30% of developers living in more rural regions. And you can have set up a startup in Erfurt and you will find developers. Where you always find the profile that you're looking for, particularly when you look for very specialized profiles, not 100% guaranteed. But you do have, particularly in Western Germany, you have that magic of we are a decentralized country, we have a high population density, and that also means that one of the surprising hubs that I saw was Billingen-Schwenningen, I think, is south of Baden-Württemberg. You have a couple of thousand developers there, and in the surrounding areas, great, you can hire them. Awesome. So that is the magic of Germany, right? That we do have powerhouses like Berlin, like Munich, like Hamburg, Stuttgart, Frankfurt, and so forth. But we also have small to middle-sized companies that are off of the big powerhouses and that are able to hire developers and technical staff. So this is where I was really sitting like, Germany. Yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's definitely wonderful. And you gave me some information about the stats in advance, which was helping me to prepare for today's session. And I was also very surprised that we have some medium-sized hubs in Germany, for example, Villingen-Schwenningen, as you mentioned, or also Würzburg. So what do you think? So this now goes more like to interpret the data. What do you think do these these regions offer to tech people in particular? Is there something that they do special compared to other small regions that do not have these amount of developers?
I have to add, I did my Abitur in Würzburg, so I'm from Franconia. It's not my original hometown, but I moved there for Kollegstufe, so I did my Abitur there for all the non-Germans because this is like high school, grammar school leave certification. And Würzburg in itself is a very interesting example because you have they have one of the lowest rates of unemployment in Germany, generally for all professions. And we used to joke that nothing ever happens in Würzburg, which can make it a bit boring, yes, but also it's very stable. And you have, locally at least, you can have your pick as a developer, right? Particularly if I have a bit of a broader profile that you can, transfer to a couple of companies. And that is really great. So, and I think with my family also, there was a business set up, outside of Würzburg and Schweinfurt. So, and they've been looking for, developers. So that is something where you can say, hey, I have a really good life-work balance in this location. I can maybe go to an agency. I can maybe go to a small to medium-sized company. I might even be able to work remotely for a larger corporate, right? So I know a couple of cases of that as well. And you can enjoy the life and live your life. It's great. And particularly if you don't like big cities, that's an amazing choice. We see, for example, in Baden-Württemberg, that's also where we have lots of hubs that are very close to one another. So if you're prepared to maybe with like hybrid regulations or remote options to drive a little bit, you can even have a much larger pick of jobs in that respective area surrounding you. So, I mean, spoiled for choice, right? That's amazing. And again, that's one of the bits of magic we see in what Germany can provide to developers. Not talking about all the other hurdles like immigrating to Germany and getting status, because that's horrific. Horrendous. We all know that, and I know that because I've had folks that had to go through that in my teams. But yeah, that's a different matter. But and I should add that in the more rural regions, it is useful if you speak German, also as a developer. Yeah, it does give you many more job prospects.
Yeah. And we got a lot of feedback from the audience. So many people wrote us on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. And we have Berlin, Germany, Berlin, Stuttgart, Leipzig, twice Passau. I think we three share something common. We all studied in Passau. Again, Germany, people looking to come to Germany, Wiesbaden, Berlin. So people from all across Germany are basically watching. And also people from abroad looking at an option or looking for having a job or relocating to Germany, which is great.
Funnily enough, I was actually surprised how low the numbers are in Passau. I was shocked because the informatics department was big at Uni Passau. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great, by the way. And now there's some obvious question that comes to my mind when you were talking about the rural areas and the countryside. So now the question for me is, how does it changed in the last 3 years? So is like are there more people on the countryside and maybe taking advantage of cheaper cost of living?
That is a question that I don't think we can answer with the data sets, because in the data itself, actually the big hubs grow quicker. So we do see that again, Berlin and Munich, and you all know I'm Team Berlin because I live here and I love this city. But respect and kudos to Munich. This is the original sort of tech hub in Germany. We see much higher growth rates for those two hubs, and also for other large hubs than for the more rural areas. That being said, we have seen a disruption with Corona, and there are many more remote and hybrid options. So just anecdotally, I know a lot of developers that officially have their job in Berlin, and this shows up in the statistics, but they live with their family in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern or in Thuringia, right? So, and then they maybe drive into the office once every week or once every 2 weeks, and then they meet the team and so forth. So we don't see that showing up, because it's always about the registration of where your primary work location is, right? So it could indicate, on the one hand, that maybe the larger hubs do attract more people. And one of the reasons for that could be that the expat rates have been growing more than the citizen rates, or at least the data that we can identify is a breakdown between citizen and non-citizen. So we don't know whether those are expats or people that have grown up here but just don't happen to have citizenship, right? Looking at the numbers, though, I would say, yes, they do reflect the influx of expats that come to this country, people with qualifications. We direly need those, and we see the number going up. And those primarily tend to go, we all know that also from other data sets, they tend to primarily go to the larger hubs where they might have the community already there and, some infrastructure. It's always good to have your fellow people around you. That being said, again, with the remote structures, that might not be reflected in the data, and we just don't know from that. But yeah, we'll see how the development goes. Also, we have to understand that with the hiring practices of particularly the last 2 years, there was quite a bit of disruption in the market. First, everybody hired, and then mid-2022, we saw the layoffs happening. So from 2021 to 2022, we had an overall growth in the job family of developers of 8% year over year. And this is actually even higher than the year before, 2021, right? But I would assume that we see a bit lower growth rate in the next year, still high growth rates compared to other professions, but lower than maybe what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years.
And do you know where the people are coming from? Are these graduates from Germany, experts from abroad, or maybe people taking a boot camp and basically coming from another background?
That we don't know. So again, we know that, and also it just breaks down to binary, right? Even though we have a third gender option, it's not recognized in the data. It's just men and women. So we know men and women. We know citizens, non-citizens. We know the age. There are 3 age brackets, and there are 3 expert level brackets that are identified in the Federal Agency for Employment data. And that's all we know. So can we break it down further into how many experts are men? No, we can't, because that's not what the data set is giving us. And believe me, I tried. I went through all of the Excels. But at least we have a good indicator and can form a somewhat informed opinion out of this. Yeah.
So, last question regarding location, or especially coming to Germany in general, because we got some questions from people who ask, do you have any tips if you are an expert in technology, data science, or engineering? Do you have any tips how to get a job in Germany?
The good question, right? I think folks in tech already have a much better standing than other folks. That being said, a lot of the jobs that we do categorize as low qualification are still not filled in Germany. So yeah, our government says it as well. We need immigration just to keep up the level that we have, our economic level. So I think you're starting out from a good place already, right? I would always say build a community, join some online meetups, even if you're not in Germany at the moment. Look up what are you looking for in an employer. Make a list and see if there are particular employers in Germany that fit that bill. Again, do you like working remote, even though you immigrate to this country? Could be a good way to do that, right? And particularly, there was this whole debate in the community for the last years that people that come into this country are paid lower than citizens. And we do see in the data that, yes, this is true to a certain degree. So make sure you're aware of the salary levels as well, right? And how you can negotiate in a good way. But it might be that due to various regulations, you might not get the, let's say, super fancy job right away. And I'm not saying, don't have expectations. It's just reality, right? So try to stay flexible, try to see where you could fit with your skill set in a good way. And then sort of the classical portals, right? Going through the portals, looking at what does the community share. A lot of the communities have online spaces where they do share job ads, and they often add whether relocation is sponsored or not, because that's another thing that you should clarify. Sometimes companies have a very restrictive policy of we hire experts, but only if they're already in this country. Or we hire experts and we do sponsor. We hire experts, but on their own costs, or we hire experts and we sponsor their relocation costs up to a certain amount. So that's always good to clarify that. And I think I haven't seen any company that does not help with immigration support. So I was once in a very, very small company and we were desperately looking for developers. And we had to go through all the hoops because some of the developers that we managed to recruit just happen to have Iranian citizenship. So that's one of the countries where it's a bit more challenging. And back then you didn't have the new legislation that is coming up, right? Makes it a bit easier to stay permanently and then to get citizenship. But so every company that I've seen, small or large, they in some way or shape or form support you on that. It's just what kind of support do you have? Is it outsourced to an expert agency, or is that in-house? Do they have to build up that knowledge and so forth? So yeah, look out for that, right? If you have a company that is very experienced with these kind of processes, then your journey here will probably be a bit smoother. Yeah, and I'm saying that very much from the hiring manager. Then, so you see, I've hired tons of developers over the last year, and had my moments of joy when people got citizenship or residence permit, or we managed to get them over.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for that, and I hope the audience can make something out of it and use these tips. And you also brought the perfect segue to the next thing we want to talk about with you, and this is compensation and salary. Could you give us like a broad overview about that?
Yeah. So again, and I wrote a whole article about that. A lot of folks, whether they are citizens or non-citizens, they go to the job portals and check the salary levels there. And what we see there primarily is that people share their information when they are unhappy with the salary that they get, right? And then the salary levels, and we see that in the official data, by the way, as well, that the overall salary levels are much, much lower than what you would anticipate. Why? On the job portals, you have people that share when they're not happy with the salary. And in the official statistics, you have a median of all the salaries. So working student salaries, part-time, etc., right? We also see the famous gender split in salaries. Women consistently get paid lower, even though we ask for the same amount of money. So that's what we see the effect as well. Now, on top of that, you have some surveys, and again, I wrote a whole article about that, of sources where there are providers that look at realistic salaries and can give you a little bit more of an exact median, right? At the same time, I always say, do stay realistic, particularly in the hiring frenzy of 2021. Salaries went up and up and up and up. Germany is nowhere near the salary levels of the US, for example. And that's also okay, because for a long time we had much lower living costs in comparison. So even now with inflation, our costs for food, for example, are much lower than in other countries. Rent has gone up, other costs have gone up. So yeah, you might also want to know what is realistic, what you can get for yourself, and how you can negotiate on that, right? By the way, I do write about these things as well in various publications. So understand the market, look at the right sources to give you information, also exchange with your community about that, very good, right? And then we have some data that breaks it down for the whole profession, again, very vast and broad. And then we have some data that breaks it down according to seniority level and what you can get, for example, as an entry salary and so forth. What I consistently see, as always, is that women, again, we tend to be pragmatic. So we ask for lower salaries because we already anticipate that we will get paid less. So once you know what is a realistic entry salary, maybe your community mirrors that back to you because you know people that work at that company, then you can go with a very realistic number and figure into the negotiation and get the best for yourself, while also being respectful to the company that's employing you.
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge is power, always.
Yeah, definitely.
And how can fixed salary grids help to balance out the salary gap between men and women? Do you see there is a huge advantage in implementing those salary grids?
I do think transparency will help greatly. And by the way, in Germany, in a couple of years, we have to be transparent on the job ads. So this legislation is coming, right? So in the US, it's starting up in some federal states already. And then they share broad bands like senior developer, 80 to $300K. Okay, where do I place myself now? So as you can see, I'm for very transparent and well-defined salary brackets, because both sides benefit from that. It does no one any good if you hire someone at a very high figure and then everybody else sees that and is frustrated and then they resign. It also does not help to underbid people and then they are disgruntled, they also leave. So we have this consistent messaging in the community, and particularly to women in tech, that women in tech need to fix themselves. Apparently we ask for not enough money and so forth. To a certain extent, that is true, but the larger truth is that we ask for the same and get less because bias comes into play. So what can you do? And companies have a responsibility for that, right? Salary transparency internally, potentially externally with the legislation coming helps greatly, because if you are an immigrant woman, potentially maybe of a very underrepresented category, woman of color, and you come in and 3 companies tell you get this and this and that, and you think, yeah, that's the end deal and that's what I will get, you will probably not push for more. So knowing that helps. And then companies also have a responsibility to fix internal pay gaps, right? Look at your numbers, look at the numbers. That's what we're all doing, looking at the numbers. And I will guarantee you that 99% of companies will find that women are paid lower because women tend to do more care work, so they are more proportionately in part-time roles. Do you encourage your developer fathers to take parental leave? Do you not do that, right? How do you look at the various genders and what is your messaging? Do you look at the overall numbers and do you adapt that? Do you have representation of your base in the leadership position? That would get, salary balance up. So there are so many things, and we could probably have another call on that, where I see the responsibility on both sides of the coin. You as the candidate knowing about what you can get and you being informed and you going in with a realistic and respectful baseline, and then you can negotiate, at least for a lot of companies. And then also the responsibility on the company side, right? It's not one side's fault or the other side's fault, but being aware, challenging your biases, and taking the necessary steps on both sides is important. And then we can approximate and get to a bit of a better balance overall. And yes, and male allies. I'm talking to all of you male allies here in this call. Please speak up, speak out, right? Talk about what you earn, because that also helps your female colleagues. I've had that opportunity a couple of times, and then in my career realized that I earned 40% less than my male colleagues. That helped me greatly, right? So that is good information, and you can do your bit for that. And particularly if you're in decision maker positions, nobody says you should be unfair. That's not what we're talking about, not for any underrepresented group. But do challenge your biases and check in the numbers how you can, be fair overall.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, so maybe we could talk a little bit more concrete about the numbers, for example, in the bigger hubs. So what would be a median salary, for example, in Munich and Berlin, and also compared to the smaller hubs or maybe the hidden champions?
So that's the thing. Since the official salary data we have only breaks down for federal state, not for council, we do know the numbers for Hamburg and Berlin, but we don't know them for Munich. So we know them for Bavaria, right?
Okay.
I actually don't have this at hand, I think, but I do have the overall national average at hand. And in the last 2022, we had an overall salary of 5,600, a little bit over 5,600 per month. And then men have approximately 5,600 for men, 4,000, almost 5,000 for women. And then the median salary for across the whole bracket for everyone, independent of gender, is 5,500 roundabout. And you can do the math, right? If we calculate that upwards to what would be a yearly salary, this is not what would be the equivalent of what currently is the median salary, the realistic pragmatic median salary across the whole seniority spectrum, which lies at around 75K per year. So almost every survey, every statistic that I find, they end up somewhere in that area of 65 to 78K for median across all seniorities, all levels, right? And then what we do see in the numbers, whether it's official statistics or from the providers, is that, Munich and Berlin, you tend to earn more than in Thuringia. Of course, we have very high rents here, right? But for a long period of time, Munich used to be up here and Berlin used to be down there because Berlin was sexy but poor. That's a quote from the mayor. That doesn't come from me. This has equalized a little bit over the last years. Hamburg also used to have higher levels, but I saw in the statistics that the growth rate hasn't been as high as in Munich, for example. So salaries have grown more in Munich over the last years, which is also kind of interesting, right, in and of itself, because Munich has gotten very, very, very expensive over the last years, extremely expensive. And I've lived there for 2.5 years, and I was paid pittance, and I scrapped and saved, right, when I was there, and I was happy to come to Berlin from that angle at least. So we do see some dynamics, and then the official statistics for example, Thuringia, Saxony, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, you see very, very low salaries overall, at least for the tech field, right? And again, these come from the official salary information that we get from the government across all of the positions. So 50K, 60K is much more realistic for a senior developer in Thuringia than it is or would be, for example, in Munich, right? And again, I'm not putting a label on is that a good or is that a bad thing. I'm just mirroring what the statistics say and the development that we see. And then, companies need to draw their own conclusions from that. Candidates need to draw their own conclusions from that. What kind of numbers they go in with, what kind of numbers do they offer? But generally, I do anticipate that you have a little bit lower living costs in Thuringia, depending also on where you live. And then there's this whole debate, should you pay location independent or not location independent? Again, what is the right path? Could be one way, could be the other way, right?
Do you have a take on that? What is your opinion about that? Maybe we can also all discuss about this and to give our opinions on that. Do you think payment should be completely independent of location?
To be honest, I haven't gotten to the end of that debate and my personal opinion on that. I do see a lot of pros and cons on both sides. And I've been following the discussion for the last years, particularly for the US market, US and Canada market. I do think we need to rethink our approaches with remote and hybrid models becoming more prominent, right? This is a change I mean, I do know examples of people that get a Munich salary but then live somewhere in the east on the rural side. So would that be fair to someone else? Should we look at it as being fair or not? Those are the questions that I would ask, right? But at the end of the day, I always say, what do you have as a context in your company? Because we can talk about it. That's the thing. I'm always, when I form an opinion, it's so easy to be like, oh, I think, and it should be done this way, and this is the right way. But you don't know the context of that particular company, right? Analyze the market, involve your HR experts, your recruiting experts, your engineering and hiring managers. Put all of them together and their brains together and analyze what context, what tools, what kind of situation you have, and draw your learnings from that, and then adapt your structures and your offers according to that. And that will look very, very differently will look very different for a company that is in a small village next to Erfurt and Thuringia in comparison to a large global player that has their base in Munich.
Yeah. And I think what is definitely important to mention is that in big tech hubs where you have multiple of opportunities to work for great companies, of course, there is a competition between those companies, and they definitely try to use the salary as one of a great benefit to attract new talents. Whereas in smaller hubs or in rural areas where there are not so many competitions, companies probably won't think of that in the first place. And then they first look at how is the overall payment structure in their company, because it can be also quite difficult if you have extremely high salaries for IT people only and all the rest of the employers have a, a lot less in the salaries, which makes it also very unfair when you see it only for the companies. So I think it's a very difficult discussion. And for me, I can definitely agree on your opinion. I'm also not 100% set with mine.
Yeah. That being said, Sarah, the highest salaries are not even with developers. No, 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 no. Tech sales. Tech sales, you make the big bucks. So if you really have a situation where you need to make a lot of money, you like selling, you like engaging with people, you have that talent and that drive, you could even study computer science and then go into tech sales. And because there you have a lot of success-based pay as well, but also the base pay is slightly higher from the official statistics that we see.
Yeah, maybe we can also put this question to the audience. And what is your take on that? Would you like to have an location independent salary? Would you like to, or are you for salary grids that are most or try to increase the transparency in the salaries across your companies? Or in general, what is your take on that? You don't have to name your salary, by the way. We are not interested to hear that. It's more about to get your opinion on this topic in general.
Just a personal story from my side. When I graduated, I applied for different companies, also for one in Munich. And obviously, the Munich company paid the best salary. But taking into account cost of living in Munich, it turned out to me it's better to stay with a company in the rural area, because in the end, I will have more on my bank account if I stay in the rural area instead of moving to Munich. But there are many things to consider. Maybe you have more chances to switch companies in like metropolitan areas like Munich. You may be in bigger companies, which tend to be in the hubs, in the big hubs. You have more chances to basically step up the career ladder. So there are many things to consider, basically.
And I think regarding the networking part, if you are somebody who wants to create a career network in bigger cities, you have so many opportunities to join meetups, to meet like-minded people, and it's a lot more difficult when you are in a very small town or city, and if the community is quite small.
Okay, we are getting some feedback from the audience.
Yeah, the silence in Germany is mentioned, right?
Yeah. That's true. Well, we just showed it here that we are not interested in that, but we also want to protect you because it's like we are live on the internet, and if there's only one person who shares the information, I think it's also very unfair for this one. So it can turn out to be very unfair, and we don't want to bring anyone in trouble. However, I completely agree with the statement. Of course, we have to talk a lot more, and therefore, of course, you can use the internet and be very open to that, but you can also use your network, talk with your friends first. I think that's a more safe space, and then you can learn from each other. I think that's very important that we do that.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, any clause in German contracts that says you cannot talk about your salary unless it's a very specific context is illegal. So you can't talk about your salary. And I think any manager who has a problem with that, right, if you have pay transparency within the company, then talking about salary is not that big of a deal anyway.
Yeah.
And Belinda also brought an important point up. I mean, if you have a partner, if you have a child, if you have some kind of obligation somewhere, it's not that easy to like move 300 kilometers to another city. So also keep that in mind, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, look at benefits, right? A lot of companies have benefits package that if you transfer that to actual money value can add great value to your salary, whether that's paying for your mobility subscription or providing kindergarten care or something like that, right? If you then calculate the actual numbers on what that gets you, or if you are a person who really likes to have, company sponsored pension schemes because you want to take care of things for your old age. Yeah, that also works, and it gives you also monetary value, at least when you are older in return. So a lot of people only look at salary, but that's not the only story. There's always salary, variable parts of the salary, and then usually a benefits package, or in many companies at least. And also, the variable part is very debated in the developer community as well, because unlike tech sales where you can pinpoint you sold that to customer XYZ, there was a whole article by Gary Orish, and shout out to him, about developer productivity recently, and hot debate.
Yes, for sure. Christina mentioned that she is definitely for more transparency within the company, but I think also abroad. I think she mentioned that the pay range transparency is, and posting the pay range on the job postings is important. And Tim Hüttemeister, I'm not bringing his comment to, or I can show it actually. Why not? He is also mentioning that he thinks that we need more transparency in talking about salaries, and it's important to do so. And that he seems to be quite lucky with his job situation, which is good to see that they are not there are also people that feel themselves lucky and that they are satisfied with the situation they are living in.
And by the way, there are lots of offers for expats as well, right? When you move to a different state and you have to know about taxes and how much is deducted from my salary. Yeah, build up community and find those sources, and then we can look into that.
And there are some companies, at least there's one coming to my mind, it's called InnoGames. It's a Hamburg-based company. They put out their salary bands out last year. And I think it was a great move because they were basically the first in that size that did it. And I think if you're responsible in a company, you can basically also get a lot of attention if you do that right now, because nobody is actually doing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that also goes into hiring the underrepresented groups, because it's fairly easy in Germany to hire a white German 35-year-old senior developer who specializes in front end and knows the JavaScript TypeScript stack. But how can you ensure representation in your company a good way, particularly if you build a product that addresses a wide variety of people with different backgrounds? So that gives you that extra edge in many ways. There are a couple of other things as well. But for example, for my community, I always say that I'm connected with all the women in tech in Berlin by at least 2 degrees, because A, there aren't that many to start with, and B, we also talk to one another. Surprise, surprise. And yeah, the things that underrepresented groups are drawn to are sometimes very different in comparison to the majority, the overrepresented group, right? So yeah, and there are a lot of companies that I've seen that do it really, really well with pay transparency, with a couple of other instruments, but that really, really gets the gear. And I say this from a perspective of having increased the percentage of underrepresented people in a fairly short time. So yeah, it helps, right, to look into, let's say, more unusual methods and approaches and be creative.
Yeah. Belinda came up with a very good question. So, how reliable are company review platforms like Glassdoor or Kununu in terms of gauging salary spans?
Yeah, very good question, Belinda. I'm referring to what I said previously. It's not bad for orientation, so don't think that there's no value on those platforms. I think Glassdoor in particular is a bit better overall from the numbers that I've seen, a bit more correct. Kununu is part of New Work, I think, and they regularly publish salary reviews. I did write about that in my article as well, by the way. Yeah, respect to everyone involved and how they publish and how they gather that data. We have to understand that every data that is collected there is a representation of that particular target audience, right? And we all know that tendentially we write reviews where, yeah, I mean, there are companies that encourage people to write reviews when they are, satisfied with their work environment and their salary level. So we do see that too, or they write that because they really genuinely like the company, right? And they want to express that. So it is a mix at the end of the day. I would say always combine several sources. Don't just rely on one source only. That helps greatly. Yeah.
I would like to switch to a topic that is closely connected to the salary bands. And I think it's a topic that you're very passionate about. It's about how can we attract more underrepresented people and also women to work in this industry? Because you mentioned, I think there was like the split 90% to 10% in Germany, and you already mentioned that it's different in other countries. So what are we doing wrong? What can we change, basically?
Sebastian, what are we doing wrong? The list is endless. And I've been on the receiving end of some of these things myself in person, and I did not enjoy the experience. I mean, we have currently in Germany, no matter where you look, usually a percentage of share of men between 82 to 95%. Usually mostly being the range being between 84 to 88%. And now you look at the number and you're like, 88% men in that profession. How is that? Like we have a population where we look at about 50% women, 49% men, and 1% non-binary people. So you're like, something is not adding up in this. So even just that should make people think. And we have so many mechanisms like that starts in childhood. I grew up with like men do the technical stuff and women are in the kitchen, right? And you cannot drive the tractor, Franziska, because that is what the men do on the field. Yes, I did harvest potatoes when I was little. So the messaging is it starts early, right? It starts early, and you're being told like technical stuff is not for you. And companies cannot, I don't think we can change that overnight, but companies can do a lot to just do things very naturally that they don't do at the moment naturally, which is oftentimes when I hear the saying of we don't treat people differently and so, no, we all have biases. We all have biases, and to acknowledge that is the first step. So that is very, very important. Any company that has in their job ad the saying of we don't discriminate, it's like I don't buy this. It's like no. If they say we are aware of our biases and we deal with that, yes, then I think this is a great first step, right? And kudos to all the companies who have taken that step. But yeah, you can analyze salaries and see where the pay gap is and where the pay gap comes from. That's one thing. Your messaging, right? What kind of messaging do you send out? How do you make sure that you establish and cultivate allyship in the company? I mean, so many situations where things happen. I looked around, I was like, is nobody like addressing this and coming to my help, right? So that is important to educate people to really, start a mindset change. I have so many stories of women developers who came to a team and they were the only woman on that team. And it's not like overt discrimination or things that happen there. It's very, very subtle, but it gets to you like for a while, right? And when you have other role models, that's another thing. What kind of role models do you have? If I can see it, I can be it. And by the way, everything that I say just does not go for men and women only. It goes for all underrepresented groups, whether that's the folks we see in the database with non-citizenship that feel like they have a worse position when it comes to negotiating salaries. And I mean, the statistics and the indicators tell us that, yes, there is reasoning to that. People with disabilities, with chronic illnesses, we have a very high share of people with neurodiversity in tech jobs. Oh my goodness, we are above average percentage in tech. So there are initiatives that a lot of companies have invested into, for example, hiring specifically people of the autistic spectrum, right? So educate your folks, challenge your biases, invest into all levels, get leadership on board, cultivate allyship. And then based on that, you can take your actions and you will see things changing. And there's always this case made for this is a business case. It makes, yes, I see that and I take that as a reasoning. But for me, at the end of the day, it's also, do you want to provide a decent environment, right? And what kind of perspectives do you have? What kind of representation do you have? It's just a decent thing to do. So yeah, they're very powerful mechanisms. They're very low-level mechanisms that you can use, and there's a vast range. But the numbers in themselves, they're fairly disappointing, and we can and should definitely change that. And also, by the way, we don't see a lot of change in the gender split over the last years. It has remained quite steady. Slight gains, yes, particularly in Berlin, Munich, particularly the large hubs. Again, an indicator, do the women go to the large hubs? Why do they go to the large hubs, right? And most importantly, also, how do you keep women in that field? Because also the data very clearly tells us that roughly after 10 years, women tend to leave STEM jobs at a higher proportion than men do. And this is not because women don't have stamina or we are not assertive. It's just there are a lot of other reasons. So don't only think about the funnel coming in. Think about how you can keep folks, how you can develop careers in a way that is equitable for everyone. So these are the things that I keep on talking, keep on writing about, and having walked the walk with the results. I think, it is possible at least to a certain degree, and go out there and try yourself out.
And I think Shobi also pointed out it's not just the software developers. Obviously, we're talking like basically about many roles in IT. He's mentioning like agile coach, scrum master, product owner, developer relations. So it basically applies to all of these, right?
Yeah, true. Oh, by the way, agile coaches, scrum masters, higher percentage of women. Just saying. Yeah, well, it tends to be this like care work associated with that, right? And then people tend to go more in those roles.
So that would also mean women may be the better manager?
I refrain from saying that because I think developing a good manager and leader toolkit is irrespective of gender. Sebastian, on the contrary, I have so many examples of women that were like, oh, you do great care work, you could be the manager, right? And then they step out of technical roles. So maybe we should think more about how can we enable better tech lead careers. And you talked about this at the beginning of the calls, particularly for people of underrepresented groups, rather than shoving the women always into the care work roles, because management is care work to a certain degree. And definitely I confirm that. So if that's something that she wants to do and she's absolutely enthusiastic about that, yes, please go for it, right? Then we have representation and leadership and she loves that. But if she wants to stay in a technical role, and I also have a lot of examples for that, think about, do you have to have a manager career or can you have a parallel career, I see, in manager leadership?
Yeah.
Great, Franziska. We are already at the end of our time. Unfortunately, we assumed in the beginning that we will have or that we will need more time in order to dive in all the different specific topics. However, it was great fun. Maybe we can make a very, very small turnaround, like we three, summarizing maybe one of us as what are you taking away from our discussion? And I can also start. What is really bothering me is the salary part, because I still have not made up my own opinion whether salary should be completely independent of a location, of gender. Of course, it should be independent of gender. But the location is the thing that I still need to think about. And it was therefore quite interesting to have this discussion with you two. Forwarding to Sebastian, what is your takeaway?
So, first of all, I was surprised that Stuttgart has more software developers than Hamburg. That is something you wouldn't expect, because like Hamburg is like over a population of over 1 million, and Stuttgart is like quite, I mean, smaller than that. And also coming back to this discussion about like remote work and salary bands, I'm totally with Franziska on this. It's really hard. I'm not having like a strict like position on that, because it's really hard to make this fair. Basically, I don't see a solution right now to have a fair solution for this, and I think the future of remote work and the future of basically the job environment, how this changes and transitions over the next years, will probably have a big impact on that, because we don't know how it will turn out. I mean, we had many companies going remote first. I just wrote about that last week, and now they are pulling back. They are having their return to office policies, and so we will see what the next years bring to us.
And my summary, by the way, Stuttgart car industry, right? So we should underestimate the power of the car industry in Germany. My takeaway is essentially thank you to the audience for the great questions. And my takeaway is stay curious, right? Inform yourself, go to really good sources, connect, network. Together, you're always stronger as being one of a larger community, a larger group of people. And you can also support one another and uplift one another. And this is essentially what we did in this call. And I also say that from the perspective of looking at the leaders and managers in this call. It's the same, right? You are not alone. Get advice, get exchange. Of course, you cannot share any details, and they are confidential matters. But just building up a practice, building up a toolkit, great. And then ultimately that translates into hopefully offering great jobs that have really interesting technical challenges for people out there. Or if they don't, be transparent about that, also good. And hopefully at the end of the day, a good equitable pay structure and a safe environment that really helps people innovate.
Yeah.
And I would like to add one thing. So Franziska is writing about all of this we talked about, and you should definitely give her a follow on LinkedIn, because she's not just talking about statistics, she's also talking about leadership in tech, and she also maintains a Medium publication, or basically you have a lot of blog posts, and you should definitely have a look there and follow her.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Franziska, for joining us and providing this wealth knowledge of overview of the developer market. I think it's not the first and the last time. I think we will stay in contact and see if we can come up with another learning lunch idea. And for all the watchers, thank you very much for joining. If you want to follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, please do so. Subscribe to the different channels, and then you get notified as soon as we do our next events. So have all a great and wonderful lunch or afternoon. I don't know if you had already lunch during our session, then have a great afternoon. And if not, have a good meal. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.